The fog crept through then narrow streets of Victorian London like a living thing, shrouding the gas lamps in a ghostly embrace. In this dimly lit world, Inspector Jameson made his way to the scene of the latest crime, his footsteps echoing off the cobblestones. The chill in the air seeped into his bones, mirroring the cold dread that had settled in his stomach. Jameson was no stranger to death, but this case was different. The victim, a young woman named Emily Carter, had been found in an alley behind the Opera House, her body mutilated in a way that defied explanation. The local constables had reported findings that were more fitting for a werewolf attack than anything human. As he approached the crime scene, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the fog obscured any potential observers. Shaking off the unease, he focused on the task at hand. The alley was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a single flickering gas lamp. The smell of rot and something else, something metallic, hung heavy in the air. Jameson's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he spotted the body lying in a pool of congealed blood. He kneeled beside the victim, taking in the horrific scene. The wounds were savage, jagged tears in the flesh that seemed too large to be caused by any known weapon. It was as if... No, it couldn't be. Werewolves were the stuff of legends, myths to scare children. Yet the evidence before him suggested otherwise. "Inspector, we've been expecting you," a voice called from the shadows. It was Sergeant Jenkins, his trusted colleague. Jenkins handed him a lantern, its warm glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Any signs of forced entry?" Jameson asked, his voice steady despite the macabre spectacle. "None, sir. It's as if she just appeared here," Jenkins replied, his tone laced with unease. Jameson nodded, making a mental note. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered such perplexing circumstances. Over the past few months, there had been a string of similar murders, each more brutal than the last. The press had taken to calling it the Werewolf murders, much to the chagrin of the police department. But Jameson couldn't dismiss the similarities. The victims were all young, all found in isolated areas, and all bearing wounds that seemed impossible. He had to find the truth, no matter how fantastical it might seem. As he examined the body, he noticed something peculiar, small, silver pendant around the victim's neck. It depicted a wolf's head, its eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. He pocketed it, deciding to have it analyzed back at the station. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the alley. Jameson stood up, lantern in hand, ready to face whoever was coming. "It's about time you got here," a familiar voice drawled. It was Lord Harrington, a pompous aristocrat with a penchant for meddling in police affairs. "Lord Harrington," Jameson acknowledged curtly, "what brings you to this sordid affair?" Harrington sneered. "I received a tip about this incident. I thought I'd pay my respects to the poor girl, and, of course, offer my assistance to the esteemed inspector." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "Assistance? From you?" "Indeed. You see, I have a particular interest in these so-called werewolf attacks. It's high time someone put an end to this nonsense." Jameson's grip on the lantern tightened. He didn't trust Harrington as far as he could throw him. The man had a reputation for being involved in shady dealings, and his sudden interest in the case raised more questions than answers. "Well, Lord Harrington, I appreciate your concern. Perhaps you can enlighten me on the nature of your interest in this matter." Harrington's smile faltered slightly before he regained his composure. "Merely a desire to see justice served, Inspector. These murders are causing unrest in the city, and it's my duty as a member of the aristocracy to ensure order is maintained. Jameson nodded, not entirely convinced. Very well. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. With that, Jameson turned back to the body, determined to find clues that would lead him to the truth. He knew that solving this case would not be easy. It would require him to delve into the darkest corners of London society and confront secrets best left buried. As he worked, the fog continued to swirl around him, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. And somewhere out there, the killer was watching, waiting for the next full moon to rise. Back at the Scotland Yard office, Jameson sat in his cluttered desk chair, staring at the silver pendant he'd found on the victim's body. The wolf's head emblem seemed to stare back at him, its glowing eyes a reminder of the supernatural undertones surrounding the case. He picked up the pendant, turning it over in his fingers. There had to be a rational explanation for this. Werewolves were nothing more than folklore, yet the evidence was piling up, pointing to something beyond human capability. Jameson's mind wandered back to his own past, to a time when he was just a boy. He remembered the stories his mother used to tell him stories of werewolves and other supernatural beings that lurked in the shadows. She had always been fascinated by the paranormal, often spending hours poring over ancient texts and attending seances. But those were just stories, weren't they? Or so he'd thought, until now. He set the pendant down and rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the memories. He had a job to do, and dwelling on the past wouldn't help solve the case. Just then, Sergeant Jenkins walked in, a stack of papers in his hand. "Inspector, I've gathered some information on the victim, Emily Carter. She was a dancer at the Opera House, quite popular among the patrons." Jameson nodded, already knowing that much. "Anything unusual about her? Any enemies or suspects?" Jenkins flipped through the papers. "Well, she was seen arguing with a man outside the Opera House a few nights ago. Witnesses describe him as tall, with a stern demeanour. No one could make out his face, though." "Describe him further," Jameson prompted. "Dark coat, hat pulled low over his eyes. He seemed to be following her." Jameson frowned. "Sounds like a typical stalker. We need to find this man. Question anyone who might know him." Jenkins nodded. "Aye, sir. I'll get on it right away." As Jenkins left, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than met the eye. The werewolf legends were just that, legends. Yet, the wounds on the victims were too animalistic to be human. He decided to visit the morgue to speak with the coroner, hoping for more insight into the nature of the injuries. At the morgue, Dr. Matthews, the coroner, met him at the door. "Inspector, I've been expecting you. The findings are quite unusual." Jameson followed Dr. Matthews to the examination room, where the body of Emily Carter lay on a slab. The coroner pointed to the wounds. "These lacerations are consistent with sharp claws or teeth. The force behind them suggests a strength far beyond human capabilities." Jameson nodded, already aware of the physical evidence. "But surely there must be a scientific explanation for this, maybe a new weapon or something of that nature." Dr. Matthews shook his head. "I've seen my share of gruesome deaths, Inspector, but this, it's as if she was attacked by a wild animal, yet there are no signs of animal involvement. The wounds are too precise, too, calculated." Jameson sighed. "So, you're suggesting that it's not human?" "I'm suggesting that it doesn't fit any known human capabilities, no." Jameson ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. He needed to find a way to connect these murders to something tangible, something that could be investigated within the realm of reality. Just then, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Elizabeth Hart, a renowned scientist and expert in abnormal phenomena. She had been recommended to him by a colleague for her unique perspective on unusual cases. "Inspector Jameson, I presume," she said, extending her hand. Jameson stood up, shaking her hand. "Yes, and you must be Dr. Hart. Please, come in." Elizabeth entered the room, her eyes immediately drawn to the body on the slab. "I hear you could use my expertise on this case." Jameson nodded. "Indeed, Dr. Matthews has just filled me in on the nature of the wounds. I was hoping you could provide some insight from a scientific perspective." Elizabeth approached the body, examining the wounds closely. "These injuries are fascinating. The force and precision suggest something beyond ordinary human capability." Jameson watched her, intrigued by her composed demeanour in the face of such gore. "Do you think it's possible that these were caused by a supernatural entity, like a werewolf?" Elizabeth chuckled dryly. "Inspector, I believe that every phenomenon has a scientific explanation. We just need to find it." He appreciated her pragmatism. "So, what's your take on this? Any theories?" Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes intense. "I think we're dealing with a genetic mutation, perhaps a rare condition that causes increased strength and agility, along with, shall we say, alterations in physical appearance." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a werewolf?" She shrugged. "Perhaps a modern interpretation of the legend. After all, science is full of surprises. Who's to say that such a mutation doesn't exist?" Jameson considered her words. It was a stretch, but it was a starting point. "All right, let's assume that's possible. How do we go about finding this mutant?" Elizabeth thought for a moment. "First, we need to look for patterns. Are there any commonalities among the victims? Any possible connection between them and the perpetrator?" Jameson nodded. "Good point. So far, the victims are all young women, found in isolated areas after nighttime performances at the Opera House." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "The Opera House? Is there anything significant about that location? Any history or rumours associated with it?" Jameson shook his head. "Not that I'm aware of, but I can look into it. Also," Elizabeth continued, "we should examine the crime scenes for any traces of DNA or other biological evidence that might indicate the presence of such a mutation." Jameson agreed. "I'll have my team collect samples and send them to the lab for analysis." As they discussed further, Jameson found himself opening up to Elizabeth's perspective. Her scientific approach offered a refreshing contrast to the superstitious rumours circulating about werewolves. Just then, his pocket watch caught his attention. It was getting late, and he needed to make progress on the case. "Dr. Hart, I appreciate your input. I think having you in this case could be invaluable. Would you be willing to assist officially?" Elizabeth smiled. "I'd be honoured, Inspector. Let's see if we can unravel this mystery together." With that, they shook hands, forming an unlikely alliance in the pursuit of justice. As Jameson left the morgue, he couldn't help but feel that this case was going to test him in ways he never imagined. The shadows of his past were intertwining with the present, and he had a growing suspicion that the truth was far more sinister than he could have ever anticipated. Inspector Jameson made his way to the address provided by Elizabeth Hart, the scientist who claimed to have information about the pendant and the werewolf murders. The night was cold, and the fog seemed thicker than usual, wrapping around him like a damp shroud. He arrived at a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, its windows dark and foreboding. A sign above the door read Heart Scientific Research. Jameson pushed open the door and stepped inside, greeted by the musty smell of old books and chemicals. "Inspector Jameson, I presume?" a voice called from the shadows. A woman emerged, her features illuminated by the dim light of a desk lamp. She had a no-nonsense demeanour, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, and her eyes sharp behind thick spectacles. "Yes, and you must be Elizabeth Hart," Jameson replied, extending his hand. She shook it firmly. "Please, follow me. We have much to discuss." Jameson followed her into a laboratory filled with jars, beakers, and odd contraptions. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, and a faint hum filled the room from some unknown source. Elizabeth led him to a table covered in papers and artifacts. "I've been studying lycanthropy for years, though it's a subject met with skepticism by most of the scientific community. But the evidence is there, if one knows where to look." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "Lycanthropy? As in werewolves?" "Precisely. And I believe that the pendant you found is connected to it." She handed him a magnifying glass and pointed to the pendant lying on the table. "See these engravings? They correspond to ancient symbols associated with lycanthropy. This pendant could be a talisman, perhaps used to control or invoke the werewolf transformation." Jameson studied the pendant closely. The symbols did look familiar, though he couldn't place them. "But how is this possible? Werewolves are just legends." Elizabeth sighed. "Legends often have roots in reality. My research suggests that lycanthropy is a real phenomenon, a rare genetic mutation that manifests under certain conditions, such as the full moon." Jameson was skeptical but intrigued. "And you think this pendant is connected to that mutation?" "More than that. I believe it's a key to understanding and possibly controlling the mutation. If the murderer is using this pendant to trigger transformations, then we need to find out how and why." Jameson nodded, considering her words. "So, you're suggesting that the murderer is a werewolf? Or someone controlling werewolves? Or perhaps something else entirely? But to find out, we need to work together. I can provide scientific knowledge, and you can bring your investigative skills to the table." Jameson hesitated. Collaborating with a scientist was unorthodox, but he was running out of leads. "All right, I'll consider it. But I need more concrete evidence before I can accept this theory." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "Then let's get started. I have some samples and data that might convince you." Plot twist. As they delved into Elizabeth's research, Jameson was presented with startling evidence. DNA samples from the crime scenes showed anomalies consistent with a genetic mutation, and eyewitness accounts described the attackers as having bestial features and superhuman strength. Moreover, Elizabeth had managed to obtain a journal from an ancient order that once hunted werewolves, detailing rituals and methods to control the transformations. The pendant, according to the journal, was a key component in these rituals. Jameson was beginning to see a pattern, but he still couldn't fully accept the idea of werewolves. Yet the evidence was mounting, and he needed to consider all possibilities if he was to solve the case. Cliffhanger. Just as they were about to discuss their next steps, a sudden commotion outside the lab drew their attention. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by muffled voices. Jameson's instincts kicked in. Someone was intruding. "Stay here," he whispered to Elizabeth, grabbing his service revolver and moving towards the source of the noise. Peering through the door, he saw a figure lurking in the shadows. The intruder spotted him and lunged forward, revealing features that sent a chill down Jameson's spinate. Was a man, but his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his fingers ended in razor-sharp claws. "Stay back," Jameson warned, raising his gun. The creature snarled, its features shifting and contorting in a way that defied explanation. It was then that Jameson realized the full extent of the horror they were facing. Werewolves were real, and they were coming for him. Inspector Jameson entered the laboratory, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Elizabeth Hart was bent over a microscope, her concentration evident as she peered into the eyepiece. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her glasses perched precariously on her nose. "Ah, Inspector Jameson," she said without looking up. "I've been expecting you." Jameson cleared his throat. "Miss Hart, I've read your letter, and I must say your claims are intriguing." She straightened up, turning to face him. "I understand your skepticism, but I assure you the evidence is irrefutable. Lycanthropy is real, and it's connected to these murders." Jameson gestured to the various jars and instruments scattered around the room. "And what exactly is your area of expertise?" "I'm a geneticist and a chemist. I've been studying anomalous biological phenomena for years, particularly those related to shape-shifting and metamorphosis." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "Shape-shifting? Like werewolves?" Elizabeth nodded. "Precisely, and I believe that the pendant you found is a key component in triggering or controlling these transformations." Jameson handed her the pendant, which she took with gloved hands. She examined it under the microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Tell me, Inspector, have you encountered anything like this before?" she asked, indicating the pendant. Jameson thought back to his childhood, to the pendant his father used to wear. "Something similar, yes, but I never knew what it was." Elizabeth looked up, her eyes locking onto his. "Perhaps there's a connection there. Your father, did he have any involvement with unconventional matters?" Jameson hesitated, memories surfacing that he'd long buried. "I don't know. He disappeared when I was young, and my mother never spoke of him." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. "Well, perhaps this pendant can provide some answers. If it's connected to lycanthropy, it could explain a lot." She began explaining her theories about lycanthropy being a genetic mutation, triggered by certain conditions, possibly the full moon. She showed him diagrams and notes, detailing her research and the evidence she'd gathered. Jameson listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. It was difficult to accept, but the evidence was compelling. He needed to consider all possibilities if he was to solve this case. After a while, Elizabeth handed him a folder containing copies of her research. "I've compiled all my findings here. I think it's crucial that you understand the science behind this." Jameson took the folder, flipping through the pages. "This is a lot to take in, but if what you say is true, then we're dealing with something far beyond anything I've encountered before." Elizabeth nodded. "Exactly. That's why I believe our combined efforts are necessary. You have the investigative skills, and I have the scientific knowledge." Jameson considered her proposal. Collaborating with a scientist was unorthodox, but in this case, it might be their only hope. "All right," he said finally. "I'll work with you, but we need to proceed cautiously. I can't have my superiors knowing about this unconventional approach." Elizabeth smiled, relief evident on her face. "Of course, discretion is paramount. Now, let's see what we can find out about this pendant and its connection to the murders. As they delved deeper into the research, Elizabeth discovered that the pendant was part of a set, each corresponding to a different aspect of lycanthropy control. She theorized that the murderer might be using these pendants to manipulate werewolves or even to transform themselves. Moreover, she found references in ancient texts to a secret society that hunted werewolves, using pendants like these to track and control them. This added another layer to the mystery, suggesting that there might be more players involved beyond just the murderer. Jameson was intrigued, but also wary. So, there's a society that hunts werewolves. Could they be involved in these murders? It's possible, Elizabeth mused. Perhaps they're taking matters into their own hands, eliminating werewolves they perceive as threats. But that doesn't explain the brutal nature of the attacks. Jameson nodded. We need to find out more about this society and their connection to the pendants. Cliffhanger. Just then, there was a loud crash from the other room. Both Jameson and Elizabeth sprang to their feet, guns drawn. They cautiously made their way to the source of the noise, only to find that something broken into the lab, ransacking shelves and destroying equipment. "Someone's been here!" Jameson exclaimed. Elizabeth's face paled. "They've been after me for years. They won't stop until they silence me." Jameson's grip tightened on his gun. "Who are they, Elizabeth? And what do they want?" Elizabeth looked at him, fear etched on her face. "I think they want to stop me from exposing their secrets. Secrets about lycanthropy and the true nature of the werewolves." With that, they heard footsteps approaching and a low growl echoed through the lab. They exchanged a look, knowing that their investigation was about to take a dangerous turn. Inspector Jameson sat across from Elizabeth Hart in her laboratory, poring over the documents she had provided. The room was filled with the scent of chemicals and old books, creating an atmosphere of intense study and discovery. Elizabeth began explaining her research, starting with the genetic basis of lycanthropy. Lycanthropy is a rare genetic mutation that affects the DNA structure, particularly in areas related to cellular regeneration and hormonal balance, she said, her voice steady and confident. Jameson listened carefully, trying to grasp the scientific concepts. "So, it's a genetic disorder that causes transformation under certain conditions?" "Exactly. The mutation is recessive, meaning it can be carried through generations without manifesting until two carriers have offspring. When both parents carry the gene, there's a higher chance of the child exhibiting the full transformation." Jameson nodded, making mental notes. "And what triggers the transformation? Is it only the full moon?" Elizabeth shook her head. While the full moon is a common trigger due to its effect on hormonal cycles, other factors can also induce transformations, such as extreme emotional stress, injury, or even certain chemicals. This was getting more complex by the minute. So, the murderer could be using something to trigger these transformations and then using werewolves to commit murders? It's a possibility. Alternatively, the murderer could be a werewolf themselves, losing control during transformations and committing these acts. Jameson rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "This is a lot to take in, but if what you say is true, then we're dealing with something beyond human capability." Elizabeth nodded. "Precisely. Which is why traditional investigative methods might not be sufficient. We need to approach this from both a scientific and a police perspective." Jameson leaned back in his chair. "All right, let's assume that lycanthropy exists and is causing these murders. What's our next step?" Elizabeth reached for a stack of papers. "I've been analysing the DNA samples from the crime scenes. There are consistent anomalies that match the genetic markers of lycanthropy. If we can isolate these markers, we might be able to identify potential suspects or even the murderer. Jameson's interest peaked. How do we go about that? Well, first, we need to collect DNA samples from possible carriers or known werewolves, if any exist. Then, we can compare those samples to the ones from the crime scenes to look for matches. Jameson frowned. But how do we identify werewolves? They're not exactly lining up to register with the authorities. Elizabeth smiled wryly. That's where the pendants come in. According to my research, these pendants can be used to track or control werewolves. If we can understand how they work, we might be able to locate and identify those involved. Jameson considered this. So, the pendant is like a homing device for werewolves? In a way, yes. It emits a specific frequency that resonates with the genetic mutation, allowing the user to locate or influence the werewolves. Jameson nodded, beginning to see the connections. And the society that hunts werewolves they use these pendants as well. Most likely, they probably use them to track and capture werewolves for whatever their purposes are. Jameson's mind was racing. We need to find out more about this society, who they are, what they want, and how they're connected to the murders. Elizabeth agreed. I have some leads on their possible identities and operations, but it's dangerous territory. They're secretive and won't take kindly to outsiders prying into their affairs. Jameson stood up, determination in his eyes. Then we'll have to be careful, but we can't let them obstruct our investigation. These murders need to stop, and I intend to bring the culprit to justice, no matter what it takes. Just as they were about to discuss their next steps, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the lab. Both Jameson and Elizabeth jumped to their feet, guns drawn. They cautiously made their way towards the noise, hearts pounding. In the dimly lit corner, they found a broken window and overturned equipment. It was clear that someone had forced their way in. Who would do this? Elizabeth whispered, her voice trembling. Jameson scanned the area, his mind working rapidly. Someone who doesn't want us to uncover the truth. Maybe the same person responsible for the murders. Elizabeth nodded, fear evident in her eyes. We need to leave here. It's not safe. Jameson agreed. Let's gather what we can and find another place to work. As they began collecting their things, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The lab felt too quiet, too still, as if something was waiting in the shadows. Just then, a low growl echoed through the room, sending shivers down their spines. They froze, guns at the ready, as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, but his features were twisted, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Stay back," Jameson warned, aiming his gun. The creature lunged forward, revealing razor-sharp claws and teeth. It was then that Jameson realized the full extent of the horror they were facing. Werewolves were real, and they were coming for them. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart packed their belongings quickly, the lab now a scene of chaos and destruction. The intruder's presence had made it clear that they were not alone in their pursuit of the truth. "We need to find a safe place to work," Jameson said, his voice firm. "Somewhere they won't find us." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "I know a place. An old friend of mine has a secure location. We can continue our research there." They left the lab, stepping into the foggy night. The streets of Victorian London were eerily quiet, the mist concealing any potential threats. Jameson kept a watchful eye, his hand resting on his gun. "Where are we going?" Jameson asked, his breath visible in the cold air. "To a place called the Hidden Lodge. It's a secret society that deals with unusual matters. They might have information that can help us. Jameson raised an eyebrow. Another secret society? Are you sure this is a good idea? Elizabeth's expression was resolute. It's our best shot. They have resources and knowledge that could be invaluable. Plus, they owe me a favor. They walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps on the cobblestones. After a while, they arrived at a nondescript building on the edge of the city. The door was unmarked, blending seamlessly with the surrounding buildings. Elizabeth knocked 3 times, paused, and then knocked twice more. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, imposing figure. "Elizabeth, it's been a while," the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. "And who is your friend?" "This is Inspector Jameson. We need your help," Elizabeth explained. The man stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and incense. The room was dimly lit, with candles casting long shadows on the walls. "Welcome to the Hidden Lodge," the man said. "I'm Marcus. What brings you here?" Elizabeth wasted no time. "We're investigating a series of murders that we believe are connected to lycanthropy. We need information about a secret society that hunts werewolves." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "The Hunters Guild. They're a powerful and secretive group. Why do you think they're involved?" Jameson stepped forward. "We found a pendant at the crime scene. It's part of a set used to control werewolves. We think the guild might be using these pendants to manipulate the transformations." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a dangerous game. The guild has been around for centuries, and they don't take kindly to outsiders poking around their business." Elizabeth leaned in. "We have evidence that the guild might be behind the murders. Can you help us find out more?" Marcus considered their request for a moment. "I can arrange a meeting with one of the guild's informants, but you need to be careful. They will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their secrets." Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a look. They knew the risks, but they had no choice. "We understand," Jameson said. "When and where?" "Tomorrow night at the old mill on the outskirts of the city. Be cautious. The informant is reliable, but the area is known to be patrolled by the guild's enforcers." They thanked Marcus and left the lodge, the weight of their mission heavy on their minds. As they walked back through the fog, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Later that night, Jameson received a message from an anonymous source. It contained a map and a warning. "The meeting is a setup. The guild knows you're coming. Be prepared." Jameson showed the message to Elizabeth. "We need to be ready. This could be a trap, but we can't afford to miss this opportunity." Elizabeth nodded, her face set with determination. "We'll need a plan. We can't walk into this blind." They spent the rest of the night devising a strategy. Jameson contacted Sergeant Jenkins, briefing him on the situation and asking for backup. Elizabeth gathered any additional information she could find on the guild and their operations. The next evening, Jameson and Elizabeth made their way to the old mill, tension building with each step. The fog was thicker than ever, shrouding the area in a blanket of uncertainty. As they approached the mill, a figure emerged from the shadows, a hooded silhouette that sent a chill down their spines. "Who are you?" Jameson demanded, his hand on his gun. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face marked by scars and a pair of piercing eyes. "I am the informant, but you're not the only ones here tonight. The guild has set a trap, and you're right in the middle of it." Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. They knew they had to act fast. The informant was their only hope of surviving the night and uncovering the truth. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart approached the old mill, their senses heightened by the thick fog and the warning they had received. The mill loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible in the mist. The informant's words echoed in their minds. "The meeting is a setup. The guild knows you're coming. Be prepared." Jameson checked his gun, his heart pounding. "We need to be careful. This could be a trap." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We have to find out what the guild is hiding. It's our best chance to stop these murders." They moved stealthily, sticking to the shadows. The mill was silent, but they could sense the presence of others. Jameson signaled for Elizabeth to stay back as he crept closer to the entrance. Inside, the air was damp and musty, the only light coming from a few flickering candles. The informant stood in the center of the room, flanked by two figures in dark cloaks. "Inspector Jameson, I presume?" the informant said, his voice calm but tense. Jameson stepped forward, his gun at the ready. "Who are you, and what do you know about the Hunters Guild?" The informant removed his hood, revealing a scarred face and piercing eyes. "My name is Thomas. I used to be a member of the guild, but I left when I realized what they were truly capable of." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked, her voice steady. Thomas took a deep breath. "The guild isn't just a group of hunters. They have a much darker purpose. They're experimenting with lycanthropy, trying to create a new breed of werewolf zones they can control and use as weapons." Jameson's eyes widened. "Weapons? What kind of weapons?" Thomas nodded grimly. "They've been working on a serum that enhances the werewolf mutation, making them stronger, faster, and more deadly. They plan to use these enhanced werewolves to gain power and control." Elizabeth's mind raced. That's why the murders are so brutal. They're testing their creations. Thomas nodded. "Exactly, but it gets worse. The guild has a high-ranking official backing their experiments, someone with influence and resources." Jameson's grip tightened on his gun. "Who is it?" Thomas hesitated, looking around nervously. "I can't say for sure, but I have a name. It's Lord Harrington." Jameson's blood ran cold. "Harrington? The same man who showed up at the first crime scene?" Thomas nodded. "He's been involved with the guild for years. He's the one funding their experiments and pushing them to create these super soldiers." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "We need to stop him. But how do we do that without getting caught?" Thomas handed them a small folded piece of paper. "This is a map of the guild's main facility. It's heavily guarded, but there are weak points. If you can get inside, you might find evidence to expose their plans." Jameson took the map, his mind already forming a plan. "We'll need to be careful. The guild will be expecting us." Just then, the doors burst open, and several figures in black uniforms stormed into the room. "Drop your weapons!" one of them shouted, aiming a gun at Jameson. Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a glance. They had walked right into the trap. Thomas stepped forward, his hands raised. "Wait! I'm on your side. I can help you." The leader of the group sneered. "You betrayed us, Thomas. You're coming with us." Thomas's face hardened. "I'll never go back to that place, Inspector. Elizabeth, run!" Jameson and Elizabeth didn't need to be told twice. They bolted for the nearest exit, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. They burst out of the mill, the fog providing cover as they fled. As they ran, Jameson's mind raced. They had the map, but the guild was closing in. They needed to find a way to expose the conspiracy and stop Lord Harrington before it was too late. Elizabeth panted, her breath visible in the cold air. "We need to find a safe place to regroup. We can't keep running forever." Jameson nodded, his jaw set. "We'll find a way. We have to." They ducked into a nearby alley, catching their breath. The fog was their ally, but the guild's reach was long. They had to be smart and act fast. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart huddled in a dimly lit alley, the fog swirling around them. They had narrowly escaped the guild's ambush at the old mill, but the danger was far from over. "We need to find a safe place to regroup," Elizabeth said, her voice strained. Jameson nodded, his mind racing. "I know a place, an old family home on the outskirts of the city. It's been empty for years, but it should be secure." They made their way through the fog, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps. The old house loomed ahead, its windows dark and boarded up. Jameson pushed open the creaky front door, and they stepped inside. The interior was dusty and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Jameson lit a candle, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. "Let's go to the study," Jameson said. "There might be some old family records that could help us." They made their way to a small room lined with bookshelves and a large oak desk. Jameson began rifling through the drawers, pulling out old letters and documents. Elizabeth watched him, curiosity in her eyes. "What are you looking for?" Jameson hesitated. "Family secrets. I need to know more about my past and how it connects to this case." He found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. He flipped through it, his heart pounding as he read the entries. The journal belonged to his father, and it revealed a shocking truth. Jameson's father had been a member of the Hunters Guild, tasked with tracking and controlling werewolves, but he had grown disillusioned with their methods and had begun to investigate their experiments in secret. One entry stood out. Asterisk the 12th of July, 1875. "I have uncovered a terrible truth. The guild is not just hunting werewolves, they are creating them. They plan to use these creatures as weapons. I must find a way to stop them, but I fear for my safety. If they discover my betrayal, I will not survive." Asterisk. Jameson's hands trembled as he read on. His father had been planning to expose the guild's activities, but had disappeared before he could do so. The journal ended abruptly, the last entry incomplete. Elizabeth placed a hand on his shoulder. "What does it say?" Jameson looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and resolve. "My father was a member of the guild. He discovered their true intentions and tried to stop them, but they found out, and he disappeared." Elizabeth's face paled. "That means the guild has been after you all along. They might have known about your connection to the case from the beginning." Jameson nodded, his mind racing. "It all makes sense now. The pendant, the murders, the guild's interest in the case. They've been trying to keep me from uncovering the truth." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "We need to find out more. There might be other documents or clues in this house." They continued their search, finding more letters and documents that corroborated Jameson's father's story. One letter in particular caught Elizabeth's attention. It was from a man named William, a close friend of Jameson's father. "Dear John, asterisk, I have found a way to weaken the werewolf mutation, a serum that can suppress their powers. I believe it could be the key to stopping the guild's experiments. Meet me at the old mill tomorrow night. We can put an end to this madness. Asterisk, yours truly, asterisk. William?" Jameson's heart skipped a beat. This must be the same William who helped my father. He might still be alive and have more information. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes shining with determination. We need to find him. He could be our best chance to stop the Guild and Lord Harrington. Just as they were about to leave the study, a floorboard creaked outside the door. Jameson and Elizabeth froze, their hearts pounding. Slowly, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room, a familiar face twisted with anger. "Inspector Jameson," the figure said, his voice cold and menacing. "I thought you might come here. You see, I've been watching you for a long time." Jameson's blood ran cold as he recognized the man. It was his uncle, a man he hadn't seen since he was a child. "Uncle Thomas," Jameson said, his voice steady but tense. "What are you doing here?" Thomas's eyes gleamed with a mix of hatred and desperation. "I'm here to finish what your father started and to make sure you don't interfere." Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a glance, their minds racing. They were cornered, and the danger was closing in. They had to act fast to survive and uncover the truth. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart stood frozen in the dimly lit study, the journal in Jameson's hands shaking slightly. The creature that had entered the room growled menacingly, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Who are you?" Jameson demanded, his gun steady. The creature stepped forward, revealing a man with a scarred face and a wild look in his eyes. "I am a hunter, sent by the Guild to bring you in. You and your secrets are a threat." Jameson's mind raced. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" The hunter sneered. "Your father was a traitor. He fell in love with a werewolf and betrayed the Guild. Now you carry the same curse. The Guild wants you both eliminated." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "We need to get out of here, Jameson." Before Jameson could respond, the hunter lunged forward. They fought fiercely, but the hunter was strong and agile, a product of the Guild's experiments. Jameson managed to knock him back, but they knew they couldn't stay in the house any longer. Escape from the estate. They dashed out of the study, the hunter close on their heels. The house was a maze of dark corridors and hidden rooms, but Jameson knew the layout from his childhood. He led Elizabeth to a back door, and they burst into the foggy night. "Where do we go now?" Elizabeth panted, her breath visible in the cold air. Jameson thought quickly. "We need to find a safe place, somewhere the Guild won't look for us. But first, we need to gather more information." The Hidden Lodge. They decided to return to the Hidden Lodge, hoping Marcus could provide more help. The journey was tense, with every shadow and sound making them jump. Finally, they arrived at the lodge, knocking on the door with urgency. Marcus opened the door, his face grave. "You're back. What happened?" Jameson explained their encounter at the estate and the revelations in the journal. "We need your help. The Guild is after us, and they're more dangerous than we thought." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "I suspected as much. The Guild's reach is vast, and they have eyes and ears everywhere. But we can help. We have resources and allies who can assist you." The Guild's influence. Marcus led them to a hidden room filled with maps, documents, and ancient texts. The Guild's influence extends far beyond what you might imagine. They have connections in high places, including the government and the aristocracy. Lord Harrington is just the tip of the iceberg. Jameson's jaw tightened. So, they have the power to cover up their crimes and manipulate the system. Marcus nodded. Exactly. They use their wealth and influence to silence anyone who threatens to expose them. But we have been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with determination. We need to find a way to expose them. The public needs to know the truth. The plan. Marcus laid out a plan. We need to gather more evidence and find a way to broadcast it to the public. The media can be a powerful tool, but we need to be careful. The Guild will stop at nothing to silence us. Jameson nodded. We need to find the Guild's main facility and gather proof of their experiments. With that, we can expose them and bring them down. Elizabeth added, we also need to find a way to neutralize the enhanced werewolves. If they're as dangerous as Thomas said, we need to stop them before they cause more harm. As they were discussing their plan, a knock came at the door. Marcus opened it to find a messenger from the Hidden Lodge's network. The messenger handed him a sealed envelope. Marcus read the contents and his face paled. We have a problem. The Guild has infiltrated the Hidden Lodge. They know we're helping you. Jameson's heart sank. How much time do we have? Not much. They'll be here soon. We need to leave now. Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a worried glance. They had to act fast. The Hidden Lodge was no longer safe, and the Guild was closing in. They needed to find a new place to regroup and continue their mission. As they prepared to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. The Guild was already on their trail, and time was running out. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart were cornered in an alley, surrounded by Guild enforcers. The fight had been intense, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Their only hope was to hold on until backup arrived, but time was running out. Jameson fired his gun, taking down another enforcer, but more kept coming. Elizabeth used her knowledge of chemistry to create makeshift explosives, buying them a few precious seconds. Just when all seemed lost, a group of shapeshifters appeared from the shadows, attacking the enforcers with ferocity. Jameson and Elizabeth watched in amazement as the shapeshifters, who resembled wolves in human form, tore through the Guild's forces. Who are they? Elizabeth shouted over the commotion. Jameson shook his head. I don't know, but right now they're our allies. Together, they fought side by side with the shapeshifters, eventually driving off the remaining enforcers. As the last of them fled, the shapeshifters disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Jameson and Elizabeth alone in the alley. Thank you, Jameson called after them, but they were already gone. Elizabeth turned to him, concern etched on her face. We need to find out who those shapeshifters are. They seem to be on our side. Jameson agreed. But for now, we need to focus on stopping the Guild's plans. We have to get inside their gathering during the full moon and expose them. They made their way back to Elizabeth's laboratory, which had been temporarily secured by Sergeant Jenkins and a few trusted officers. Inside, Elizabeth worked tirelessly to analyze the DNA samples from the crime scenes, looking for any trace of the serum the Guild was using. Meanwhile, Jameson tried to track down Thomas, the former Guild member, to see if he was still willing to help. After some inquiries, he found Thomas hiding in a seedy part of town, injured and frightened. Jameson, I didn't expect to see you again, Thomas said, wincing as he sat up. Jameson filled him in on their progress and the need for someone to infiltrate the Guild's gathering. We need you to help us plant a hidden camera inside to capture their activities. Thomas hesitated, clearly afraid. It's too dangerous. The Guild won't hesitate to kill me if they find out I'm working with you. Elizabeth stepped forward. We can protect you, and together we can bring them down and end their reign of terror. After some persuasion, Thomas agreed to help, seeing it as his only chance for redemption and safety. With Thomas on board, they devised a plan to infiltrate the guild's headquarters during the full moon. Thomas would act as a guide, providing them with access and information about the layout. As they prepared for the mission, Elizabeth developed a small, discreet camera that could be hidden on Thomas's person. Jameson, meanwhile, worked on gathering evidence of Lord Harrington's involvement, hoping to have enough to bring him to justice. On the night of the full moon, they made their way to the guild's headquarters, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of London. The atmosphere was tense, the moon casting an eerie glow over the scene. Thomas led them through secret passages and hidden doors, avoiding the patrolling enforcers. They made their way to the main hall, where a ceremony was about to take place. Inside, they saw Lord Harrington standing before a group of high-ranking guild members, a look of triumph on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrington began, "tonight marks a new era in our society. With the successful creation of our enhanced werewolves, we now have the power to shape the future of humanity." Jameson's blood boiled at the arrogance in Harrington's voice. This was the man responsible for the murders and the suffering caused by the guild's experiments. As the ceremony progressed, the guild members unveiled several werewolves, now transformed into monstrous creatures, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. These were the result of the serum, making them stronger and more controllable. Elizabeth gasped in horror. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. They're creating an army of monsters." Jameson nodded grimly. "We have to stop this, now." Just as they were about to activate the hidden camera to capture the evidence, they were discovered by a guild enforcer who had spotted their presence. Alarms blared, and the ceremony descended into chaos. Jameson, Elizabeth, and Thomas found themselves cornered, facing an army of enhanced werewolves and guild enforcers. Their only hope was to fight their way out, but the odds were stacked against them. As the full moon rose higher in the sky, casting its silvery light upon the battlefield, Jameson knew that their struggle was far from over. The future of London, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. Inspector Jameson, Elizabeth Hart, and Thomas found themselves cornered by a pack of rogue werewolves in the abandoned section of the guild's headquarters. The full moon shone brightly through a high window, casting an otherworldly glow on the scene. Jameson assessed their situation, his heart pounding in his chest. They were trapped with no clear way out. The werewolves circled them, their eyes glowing with hunger and malice. "Stay back," Jameson warned, raising his gun. "We don't want any trouble." One of the werewolves, larger than the others, and seemingly in charge, growled in response. It was clear they weren't going to let the trio pass without a fight. Elizabeth tried to think of a way to reason with them or find an alternative path, but time was running out. The sound of approaching enforcers echoed through the tunnels, closing in on their position. Thomas, visibly shaken, clutched a small knife he had managed to acquire earlier. "What do we do now?" Jameson took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. "We fight our way out. Elizabeth, you take the lead. Thomas, stay close to me." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes determined. She remembered the counter-agent she had prepared earlier. But it was just a small vial now, lost in the chaos. They needed another way to fend off the werewolves. As the pack closed in, Jameson fired a warning shot, hitting one of the werewolves in the leg. It yelped in pain, but didn't back down. The others growled louder, their fur standing on end. Elizabeth recalled something from her research. Wolfsbane, a plant known to repel werewolves. She scanned the area quickly and spotted a jar containing wolfsbane extract on a nearby shelf. Jameson, over there. Wolf's bane, she exclaimed, pointing to the jar. He nodded, understanding. Use it to create a barrier. Maybe we can buy some time. Elizabeth grabbed the jar and unscrewed the lid, careful not to spill its contents. She began smearing the extract around them, forming a rough circle. The werewolves hesitated, snarling at the scent, but began coutsind. Jameson used this opportunity to usher Elizabeth and Thomas towards the opposite end of the tunnel. "Come on, hurry," he urged, keeping a watchful eye on the werewolves. They made their way through the dimly lit tunnel, the sound of the werewolves growling and pacing behind them. Jameson could sense that the wolfsbane barrier wouldn't hold them back for long. As they rounded a corner, they saw a glimmer of light ahead the exit. Hope surged within them, but they knew it was too early to celebrate. Just as they approached the exit, a group of guild enforcers blocked their path, led by Lord Harrington himself. "Ah, Inspector Jameson, you're just in time for the finale." Harrington sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. Jameson's heart sank. They were trapped, with no way out. The werewolves were closing in from behind, and the enforcers barred their path forward. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice steady. "Lord Harrington, you can't keep doing this. The world deserves to know the truth about what you're doing here." Harrington laughed coldly. "Truth? My dear, the world is better off without knowing about these anomalies. And now, with my army of enhanced werewolves, I can ensure that order is maintained." Jameson couldn't let Harrington get away with this. "You're a menace to society. It's time to bring you down." Harrington raised his hand, signalling his enforcers to move in. "I'm afraid it's you who will be brought down, Inspector. Goodbye." The enforcers advanced, their guns trained on the trio. Jameson, Elizabeth, and Thomas prepared to fight, knowing that their chances were slim. Just then, a loud commotion erupted from behind them. The werewolves' growls intensified, and the sound of fighting could be heard. "What's going on back there?" Harrington demanded, turning to look. A moment later, a group of shapeshifters burst into the area, attacking the guild enforcers with ferocity. These shapeshifters were different from the rogue werewolves. They seemed to be allies, fighting to help Jameson and Elizabeth. "Quick, now's our chance!" Jameson yelled, taking advantage of the distraction. He and Elizabeth fought alongside the shapeshifters, taking down enforcers left and right. Thomas stayed close, using his knowledge of the tunnels to lead them towards safety. As they fought their way through, Jameson caught sight of Lord Harrington retreating towards a heavily guarded door. He knew he had to stop him. "Elizabeth, go with Thomas. I'll handle Harrington." Elizabeth hesitated but nodded, grabbing Thomas and leading him towards the exit. Jameson, meanwhile, pursued Harrington, determined to bring him to justice. He chased Harrington through the maze of tunnels, finally cornering him in a small chamber filled with scientific equipment. Harrington turned to face him, a cruel smile on his lips. "You think you can stop me? I control too many people, Inspector. Even if you manage to arrest me, my plans will continue." Jameson stood his ground, his gun aimed steadily at Harrington. "I'll see you behind bars, Harrington, and your plans will be exposed to the world." Harrington's smile faded, and he lunged at Jameson, catching him off guard. They grappled, weapons clashing as they fought for dominance. In the struggle, Jameson managed to gain the upper hand and pinned Harrington against the wall, his gun pressing against his temple. "Any last words?" Jameson growled. Harrington's eyes burned with hatred. "You can't win, Jameson. The world needs order, and I was the one to provide it. Mark my words, someone else will rise to take my place. Jameson considered letting Harrington live for questioning, but the risk was too great. He pulled the trigger, ending Harrington's threat once and for all. As Jameson left the chamber, he found Elizabeth and Thomas waiting for him, relief etched on their faces. "Is it over?" Elizabeth asked. Jameson nodded, though he knew that this might not be the end. "For now, we need to get out of here before more enforcers arrive." They made their way back through the tunnels, emerging into the night air. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal light over the city. As they walked towards safety, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Elizabeth turned to him, concern in her eyes. "What now? The guild is defeated, but who knows how many other groups like them exist?" Jameson sighed, knowing that their fight was far from over. "We'll have to see. For now, let's focus on exposing what the guild did and bringing those responsible to justice." Thomas spoke up, his voice filled with resolve. "And I'll help any way I can. I can't go back to the guild, but maybe I can make amends for what I did." Jameson clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." As they walked into the foggy night, they knew that their journey was just beginning. The battle against those who sought to exploit the supernatural for their own gain was ongoing, and they were ready to face whatever came next. After the fall of the Hunters Guild and the death of Lord Harrington, Inspector Jameson, Elizabeth Hart, and Thomas thought their ordeal was over. They had managed to expose the guild's sinister activities and bring some measure of justice to the victims' families. However, their victory was short-lived. One evening, as Jameson was reviewing the case files in his office, there was a knock on the door. It was Elizabeth, looking troubled. "Jameson, we have a problem," she said, her voice low. He motioned for her to come in and closed the door behind her. "What is it?" Elizabeth handed him a piece of paper. "I received this anonymous note. It says that not all the guild's operations have been dismantled. There's still someone in power, someone who's planning to continue Harrington's work." Jameson's eyes scanned the note, his brow furrowing. "This could be a trap, or it could be genuine. We need to find out who's behind this." Elizabeth nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. Maybe we should look into the people who were close to Harrington, his inner circle." Jameson considered this. "Yes, that makes sense. Let's start by reviewing the list of known guild members and see who might have the resources and motivation to carry on." As they delved deeper into their investigation, they discovered that one of the high-ranking guild members, a woman named Victoria Sterling, had disappeared shortly after Harrington's death. She was known to be one of his most loyal followers and had access to the guild's secret. "Victoria Sterling," Jameson mused. "She was Harrington's right-hand woman. If anyone would continue his work, it's her." Elizabeth agreed. "We need to find her and stop whatever plans she has in motion." They set out to track down Sterling, following leads and piecing together clues. Their search led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of London, where they believed Sterling was hiding. As they approached the warehouse, they could hear muffled voices inside. Jameson signaled for Elizabeth to stay back as he cautiously entered the building. Inside, he found several guild enforcers gathered around a table, maps and documents spread out before them. In the center of the room stood Victoria Sterling, her back to him. "Ah, Inspector Jameson," she said without turning around. "I was expecting you." Jameson's heart sank. He had been walked into a trap. Sterling turned to face him, a smirk on her lips. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. The guild will rise again, stronger than ever. Jameson's mind raced. He needed to find a way out of this alive and bring Sterling to justice. Your little victory over Harrington means nothing, Sterling continued. His vision will live on, thanks to me. Elizabeth chose that moment to enter the warehouse, gun drawn. Drop your weapons. This is over, Sterling. The enforcers hesitated, glancing between Sterling and the intruders. Sterling laughed. You really think 2 against a dozen is a fair fight? You're both under arrest for your roles in Harrington's death. Jameson and Elizabeth exchanged a look. They were outnumbered and outmatched. Just then, a group of shapeshifters burst into the warehouse, attacking the enforcers. It seemed that not all shapeshifters were aligned with Sterling. Take them down! Sterling yelled, joining the fight herself. Jameson and Elizabeth fought alongside the shapeshifters, taking down the enforcers one by one. The battle was intense, but slowly they gained the upper hand. In the chaos, Jameson managed to corner Sterling. She lunged at him with a knife, but he deflected her attack and disarmed her. You can't stop progress, Jameson, she spat. The world needs order, and only those who can control the supernatural can provide it. Jameson looked into her eyes, seeing the same fanaticism that had driven Harrington. You're wrong. True progress comes from understanding and acceptance, not control and suppression. Sterling sneered. We'll see about that. She made a sudden move, trying to grab her knife, but Jameson was too quick. He subdued her and cuffed her hands behind her back. With Sterling in custody and the remaining enforcers either captured or fleeing, the warehouse fell silent. Elizabeth approached Jameson, relief evident on her face. It's over, finally. Jameson nodded, but a nagging doubt lingered in his mind. I hope so, but I have a feeling this isn't the end. As they were about to leave the warehouse, one of the shapeshifters who had helped them stepped forward. It was the same leader who had assisted them earlier. Inspector Elizabeth, he said, his voice grave. There are others like us, shapeshifters, who have been hunted and experimented on by the guild. We need your help to bring them to justice. Jameson and Elizabeth listened intently as the shapeshifter explained the extent of the guild's atrocities against their kind. It became clear that the fight against those who sought to exploit the supernatural was far from over. Moreover, Elizabeth's research had uncovered that the serum used by the guild could have long-term effects on the werewolves, potentially turning them into mindless killers if not treated properly. We need to find a way to reverse the serum's effects and help those who have been affected, Elizabeth said, determination in her voice. Jameson nodded, and to ensure that no one like Harrington or Sterling can ever misuse this knowledge again. As they walked out of the warehouse, the full moon casting an eerie glow over the city, they knew that their journey was just beginning. The battle for justice and understanding in a world where the supernatural coexisted with humanity was ongoing, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Inspector Jameson and Elizabeth Hart stood over the restrained figure of the high-ranking official who had been captured during their investigation into the remaining guild operations. They had decided to inject him with the counter-agent serum, hoping to neutralize any potential werewolf transformations and gather information from him. Jameson administered the serum, watching closely for any signs of transformation. To their surprise, instead of reverting to a werewolf state, the official began to exhibit unusual physical and mental abilities. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his muscles bulged, straining against his restraints. Elizabeth monitored his vitals, her brow furrowed in concern. This isn't supposed to happen. The serum should have countered the guild's enhancements, not amplified them. Jameson's eyes narrowed. Maybe he was already undergoing some kind of treatment. Perhaps the serum interacted with it in a way we didn't anticipate. The official suddenly let out a roar, his restraints snapping as he broke free. His strength had increased exponentially, and he charged at Jameson and Elizabeth with unparalleled speed. They managed to dodge his initial attack, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Elizabeth quickly grabbed a small vial from her pocket containing a sedative. She threw it at the official, but he deflected it with a swipe of his hand. "Damn it! We need to think of something fast," Jameson yelled, firing a warning shot that merely grazed the official's arm. The official seemed unfazed by the bullet, his skin healing almost instantly where it had been hit. Jameson realized that whatever had been done to him, it had made him nearly invulnerable. Elizabeth's mind raced. His cells are regenerating at an accelerated rate. We need to find a way to slow down his healing process. Jameson nodded. "Is there anything in your research that could help?" She thought for a moment. "Silver. Werewolves are vulnerable to silver. Maybe it will affect him too." Jameson remembered the silver bullets he had used in previous encounters. "I have some silver bullets left. Maybe they can do more damage." He loaded his gun with the silver bullets and took aim at the official, who was advancing towards them once more. This time, when he fired, the bullet embedded itself in the official's shoulder, causing him to stagger back in pain. "Yes, silver works," Elizabeth exclaimed. But the official's resilience was still evident. He pulled the bullet out and threw it aside, though he seemed weakened for a moment. Jameson and Elizabeth saw their opportunity and rushed to subdue him again, managing to restrain him once more. However, they knew this wouldn't hold for long. Just then, a voice echoed through the room. "Impressive, Inspector. I see you've made progress in your little experiment." They turned to see Victoria Sterling standing in the doorway, a smug smile on her face. "Victoria, you're supposed to be in custody," Jameson growled. She chuckled. "Oh, I was for a while. But with my connections, it was easy to arrange an escape, and I see you've created quite the monster here." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You knew this would happen? That the serum would interact with his treatments?" Sterling nodded. "Of course, I engineered it that way. The official was part of a secret project to create super soldiers, combining human and supernatural elements. The serum was designed to enhance those abilities, not counter them." Jameson's anger boiled over. "You manipulated us into making him even more dangerous." Sterling shrugged. "Call it a necessary evil. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have bigger fish to fry." With that, she turned and left, leaving Jameson and Elizabeth to deal with the enhanced official. As they tried to figure out their next move, the official, still restrained, began to laugh maniacally. "You fools! You think you can control me? I am beyond your petty laws and regulations. I am invincible." Elizabeth's mind raced. They needed to find a way to reverse the effects permanently, or at least contain him until they could find a solution. Jameson, however, was already making plans. "We need to move him to a secure location where he can't cause any harm. And we need to find out more about this secret project Sterling mentioned." Elizabeth agreed. "I'll look into any records or research related to super soldier programs. Maybe there's a way to counteract the enhancements." As they prepared to transport the official, he suddenly stopped laughing and looked directly at Jameson. "You can't stop progress, Jameson. The world needs beings like me to lead it into a new era. Jameson's grip tightened on his gun. I'll make sure that never happens. Just as they were about to move the official, the room was suddenly filled with smoke, and when it cleared, he was gone, having broken free from his restraints once again. Damn it, Jameson cursed, realizing they had to find him before he caused any more damage. Elizabeth was already on the phone, calling for backup. We need to find him fast. He's too dangerous to be loose. Jameson nodded, determination in his eyes. Let's not give him a chance to strike first. It's time to end this once and for all. But as they left the room, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were now in a race against time, with an enemy more powerful than they had ever faced before.